Hey guys, Jason here. Sorry I haven't produced a video in a while, but it's been a manic summer. Thought I'd do a quick video just to get back into the swing of things here to look at cockpit flows as they can be applied to general aviation flying. If you're not familiar with a cockpit flow, it's part of the standard operating procedures or SOPs that the airlines use. So at different phases of flight, the pilot or the first officer in this case will do a set sequence of events using the natural layout of the cockpit as a guide, and they're called flows. So for example, here's an Airbus before start flow pattern for each of the crew to do with the numbered items that they need to check. And then because they use these flow patterns, the checklist is very, very brief. Here's an Airbus checklist for A320, not specific to any airline, it's just a generic standard operating procedures checklist. Look how brief it is. It's not the long, lengthy checklist that you get, say, in a Cessna or Piper manual. So I've got my own checklist that I use and my own series of flows that I use during my flight. So I'll show you some examples here following. So here is my cockpit preparation flow, and I'll actually show a video here in a minute doing this. But this is the flow I do when I first get into the cockpit before I start the engines, just to check that everything's set up. So I start over in the lower left on the circuit breaker panel and then come across on the switch panel, which is to the left of the pilot's knee. Then I come along the bottom of the panel, check that all the switches are off, then come up and check the gears down, go down, check all the trims and the fuel down below in the middle that you can't see, and then come back up and go over toward the right side of the panel. So let's look at this actually in the airplane. So here's my pre-flight flow. Go down and check all circuit breakers are in. Check my electrical panel, everything should be off except I put the beacon on for start. Avionics master's off. There's really nothing to do up on the upper panel till everything comes alive after start. So now I continue down along the bottom panel. So check the fuel pumps are off. And then check everything's off, all the switches are off down here. And then check that my autopilot and auto trim master are off. Next, come over to the middle lower sub panel, check the gear is down. I go ahead and put my meter selector on volts, check voltage when we start. Then I come down on the quadrant, I check all three trims, set for takeoff. Throttles closed, props RPMs, mixtures idle cutoff. I come down and I check my fuel selectors on the tip tanks. My gear crank handle is stowed. My alt air switches are off, and then come back up and check flaps are up and cabin heat is off. And at this point I check my flight controls. I'm a huge advocate of checking flight controls on the ground where it's quiet and you can feel or hear any abnormalities. And then I just give the cabin just a quick check, make sure, you know, if I have passengers, all the seat belts are ready and available, etc. And then I follow that up with the pre-flight checklist. So most of what's on here I've already just checked, but this is standard operating practices in the airline to do a flow and then check everything on the checklist. But the checklist is rather abbreviated. So pre-flight inspection complete, P-tail cover removed, circuit breakers are checked in, electrical equipment off, avionics master off, flight controls free and correct, autopilot, auto trim off, gear selector down, trim tab set for takeoff, propellers high RPM, mixture idle cut off, fuel selector mains, emergency gear handle stowed, alt air off, heater off, and then we'll do the takeoff briefing. So now let's look at my lineup flows. So these are the last few items that I do after I've done my before takeoff checklist and I'm ready to depart. So I'll do these last few items just as I've been cleared for takeoff or I'm about to take the runway. So let's taxi up here and we'll hold short for a split second. Let's say we've just been cleared for takeoff or we're clear to go. We'll start over on the left panel here, turn on the strobe lights. If it's IMC, I'll turn on the pitot heat. And I'll turn on the landing lights. I'll come down and I'll double check the fuel pumps are on low. Then I'll enrich in my mixtures for takeoff. And one last little check of the fuel selectors just to make sure no one's kicked them off. Next, let's look at the after landing flow. And this is the exact same pattern. It's kind of a upside down U or N-shaped flow that I will accomplish after I pull off the runway and I'm across the hold line. So let's get across the hold line here. And again, I'll start over on the left on the electrical panel. So we'll do this kind of N shape or upside down U. We'll turn off the strobe lights. Pitot heat is off. If it was on during flight, we'll retract the landing lights. We'll keep the taxi light on. Fuel pumps can come off. The autopilot master and auto trim master can be turned off, leaving them on here because we're getting ready to take off again. I'll reset the trim for takeoff. I'll double check my other trims. I'll ground lean the engines and I'll bring the flaps up. And just one little quick check again of the fuel selectors. And that's it.